So, happy Mother's Day, everyone. We're glad you're here. And thanks for coming back, whether you're joining us for the first time or whether you've been here before. I want to mention that the recordings and the slides from weeks 1 and 2 are on the church website if you want to catch up and review that. Thanks again to Lance for all the help he's been to us and the support and putting those on the website and setting up everything here. So we really appreciate your help. Okay, well, this week we are going to continue our series on Whose World, and we're talking today about being honest about climate change and accepting responsibility and taking action. But before we get started, let's have a word. Loving and forgiving God, thank you for the rain this past week and for the renewal it's brought. We thank you for sunshine today and the love of our families and our church family. We thank you, God, for your maternal characteristics that inspire us to be good mothers. Thank you for our own mothers who have done the same for us. Pray for peace in our world, for relief for all those who suffer, and wisdom to know how we can help. We pray for the world and American leaders. May they recognize and accept their roles to be servant leaders rather than follow the temptation to dominate and control people and others. May each of us serve you and serve and protect your creation as you have called us to do. All right. Well, we have already established that this is God's world. It's not ours. And today we need to think about why God's world is changing so rapidly and the danger that poses to us and to the rest of God's creation. So in our history, once we developed the combustible engine and we started releasing heat-trapping gases into our atmosphere much faster than before, then we added all kinds of inventions and industries at sort of an exponential rate, resulting in a very rapidly warming globe. The Industrial Revolution improved our lifestyle in a lot of ways, but the uncurtailed waste wasn't initially considered, and in fact, we really didn't know the impact of all of our new technologies. So now that we do understand what's happening, and once we are honest about it, then we can do something to correct it. So Dr. Catherine Hayhoe is a climate scientist who works and teaches at Texas Tech University. She's the daughter of missionaries and the wife of a Christian pastor. And incidentally, sort of by accident, I saw her last night featured on NBC News, a program called Inspiring America. She speaks to groups around the world about climate change in a way that's easy to understand, and she is especially good at speaking to Christians and with the churches. And recently, she spoke about a report released in part from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. The IPCC is the United Nations body that assesses the science related to global climate change. It's composed of 195 countries and thousands of people assessing the data around the world. The most recent report has been released in 3 parts, starting in August of last year, and then the final volume was released just last month, in April of 2022. So, Dr. Hayhoe calls the first release last August, the Code Red alert. It revealed that not only is the Earth heating faster than any time in history, but it also is heating faster than we previously thought. Now, you know that you heard reports before last year that made the situation sound very dire indeed. But in August 2021, we learned that it's even worse than those previous reports thought. And there's no question about why it's happening. Humans are causing it.
Second part of the IPCC report was released in December, and it's called the House of Fire report. It means the entire house. It demonstrates very clearly that climate change is affecting all of life in all parts of the globe, and it significantly increases for contributing to poor health, economic decline, and an increased disparity between income classes, especially the richest nations and the poorest nations. The IPCC report that was released last month is what we call a fire extinguisher report. And it tells us exactly what we need to do. It's the manual. But it doesn't press the trigger. We are the ones that have to press the trigger. We know what we have to do. And now it's up to us and to our nations and world to do something about it. Climate change has been around a long time. As a matter of fact, 1959 at the American Petroleum Institute, scientists warned the oil producers that climate change was occurring. And of course, that was so early, nobody paid much attention to it. But in 1965, White House advisors told Lyndon Johnson that by 2000, carbon dioxide would increase 25%, and it would cause significant climate change. Can you imagine what we'd need if we just started a little bit back in 1965? I first learned of climate change in 1975 when I was taking ecology in college and learned about it, but there was still so little known about it that we didn't quite know, we didn't understand the full ramifications of what it would be. But in 1977, ExxonMobil, a researcher, James Black, found out and reported to the Exxon management group that carbon dioxide predicted that carbon dioxide is likely to increase or likely to double by 1977. By 2075. Now, what's interesting is that we've already seen it's already up 50%. So that by 2075, it could easily double. He also said that he expected temperatures would rise 3.6 to 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit. He told the management group that it would probably likely change rainfall patterns and weather. He said that the polar conditions would be impacted 2 to 3 times more than the rest of the globe. And he also said we have a window of 5 to 10 years to make any changes in our energy strategy. Now, why we know this is that his granddaughter went back in his file, pulled out his presentation, and released it. And it's an interesting study to release. It's very interesting to read it, where he had all the graphs and that sort of thing. But you know, they all thought they had plenty of time. 10 years. In 1977, gas prices were going up, margins were increasing. You know, bottom areas. Things are good at this point. Can you imagine what it's been like in 45 years? We started doing something about climate change.
Okay, well, here's what we now know, and what may be the most frightening thing of all. Our climate past is not predictive of the future. Here's why. The odds of a hurricanes, say, used to be similar to rolling a pair of dice. We thought we could calculate how often a hurricane might hit at a certain place, a certain time, how severe it would likely be, kind of like the odds of, say, rolling a double six. However, as we wait to do anything about climate change, we're continually adding dots to the dice. So we're compounding the climate disasters. So a 5 on the die becomes a 6, and soon a 4 will become 5. We're increasing the odds of rolling a 12. Weather that once occurred every 100 to 500 years is now happening a lot more often, and it's, as you know, becoming less surprising to us when it happens.
Like 108 degrees. When the days have been indexed to 105, 108.
So in 2020, the nation had 22 separate billion-dollar weather and climate disasters. Texas has the distinction of leading the nation with the most billion-dollar weather events in 2020. In Texas, that year, we had $5 billion weather disasters, including hurricanes, hailstorms, and disastrous thunderstorms. Houston actually had 3 500-year floods in just 3 years.
Jenny and I decided to stop calling it climate change is not really the correct term. Maybe we should call it climate changing. Because of the way the climate isn't just changing, it's getting strange. Remember last summer in Portland during the Olympic trials when the temperature got up to 118 degrees? In the Pacific Northwest, we used to be cool or rainy and cool. It was a 1,000-year event that covered Oregon, it covered Washington, Northern California, Nevada, Idaho, and Kansas. Then, in October 2021, after Sacramento, and during 212 days of relentless drought, a deluge soaked the area in just 24 hours, causing extensive flooding. The same storm moved down the coast and dumped 16.5 inches in San Francisco within 48 hours. Massive firestorms in the west and northwestern states were intense. And that coupled with wind direction and wind speed, the smoke from those fires reached and impacted people living on the East Coast. We have to admit that all of this is not normal, but it is very strange. So none of us really want to make changes when things seem to be going well. Most decision makers in industry and government are pretty comfortable with business delivery procedures within our lifestyles. Probably most of us are pretty comfortable in it. So you may already be hearing from climate deniers a lot of other explanations about why climate change is occurring. I'm asking you today, what excuses have you heard that say it must be anything other than human causes? What other explanations have you heard that you identify another reason for global increases in mean temperature, or give us a reason why there's no need to make any changes now? Have you heard any of those? Have you run across any resistance?
I follow a lot of the national parks on Instagram, and so various times, especially places like Glacier, will comment on things that are happening. I don't even know what park it was, but it's going down the rabbit hole with comments because it really turned into like people saying, this is nothing new. This happened 500 years ago. This, like kind of, and I'm reading it like, oh, is that true? Is that true? Like, I don't have the thousands of years of knowledge saying. So that's just, I guess, this is just a normal cycle. Like there weren't glaciers here at this, stuff like that. So that's what I'm. I don't know if it's right.
Exactly. Very, very, very common. I saw a cartoon the other day in climate denier giving a talk. And it was one guy sitting in the audience tobacco industry said it doesn't have to be true, just confuse it. And so a lot of what we see, like people make comments like that, just simply not true. And there are good ways to check that. Any other people? Well, I'll tell you a couple of things that I run across. I live in a neighborhood of all retired old people. And so I've had fun talking about climate change forever. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of these objections that we've had. The very first time when I talked about mixed climate change, this guy said, well, you know what's causing climate change? It's that right there, he pointed to the sun. It's the intensity of the sun. Well, a couple of years ago, I shut down because I didn't know. I didn't know enough to argue. I didn't know enough to question what he had said. I just made, I just realized that I just wasn't there. I didn't have that information. So there is a myth that the sun is causing our rising temperature, that these sunspots are exploding out and causing all that. And that's the way this guy explained it to me. So I went to NASA to find out. And since 1970, U.S. satellites have been measuring the sun rate. Now, you can see from this graph that while the sun does have some effect on rising temperature, that since the late 1980s, total solar radiance has and is still on the decline. That's the yellow line. While global temperatures are just keep going up. So no, the sun is not heating our planet to dangerous level. If somebody makes a claim, just tell them that it's confirmed in this graph on the NASA website. These are actual facts from, these are actual studies from the, and numbers taken directly from those studies. So it's not the sun, it's not something odd, it's not something magic. One of the other things that I often hear is that volcanoes are causing. I heard one person told me, said that volcanoes use 10 times more carbon dioxide than all humans on Earth. But the truth is that after you have an eruption, volcanoes actually do cool the Earth, believe it or not. Volcanoes release sulfur dioxide that become aerosols like the sun's heat, kind of acting like an umbrella. All the studies to date show that the global volcanic CO2 emissions indicate that present-day volcanoes release less than 1% of the carbon dioxide released from the earth. Less than 1%. When the Indonesian volcano in 1850 erupted in Indonesia, the largest eruption recorded in history. That year, it was so bad there was no summer in Indonesia. And for 3 years, the temperature actually declined. They had crops failed, typhus broke out, cholera broke out, but there was no rise in temperature. And so you got another group that said, well, it's not volcanoes, it's geysers, like I was saying. So NASA went and did a study on the geysers. And they found that all of the geological formation, all the geysers in the world, produce less carbon dioxide than Virginia, Oklahoma. So no, it's not geological formation, not volcanoes, it's not.
Here's Kristen's comment. Okay, go ahead.
So here we come to do what we do. It's just a cycle. It's just a natural global cycle. And in fact, global cycles do affect the temperature as the orbit around the Earth changes from gravitational pull of the planets. You learned that in middle school. The Earth actually wobbles on its axis like a top, spinning top. But here's the thing. These cycles operate on long-term scales from tens of thousands of years to hundreds of thousands of years. And in contrast, The Earth's current warming has taken place over time scales of decades and over this century. Now, I have given in your handout a reference to the NASA website that talks about climate change. It's on the bottom of the first page, but it's a reference to the NASA climate section of climate change, and they go into easily understood explanations about some of the myths. And I'm sure, but most of these are variations. The other thing is that when you start talking about natural cycles, you got to understand that natural cycles can't produce heat. They just take heat that's already existed and move it to another part of the planet, so that when it is like what El Nino and La Nina, they, depending on what the temperature is and which one it is, one of them will cause more rain in Texas, but it will cause a drought in Australia. So it's just moving heat around. So along those cycles, we see that happen. But we've never seen melting glaciers in our lifetime, 10,000 years, many years, like we're seeing now.
Okay, let's talk about how Americans react differently to climate change. So the percentage of people who think that climate change is just a hoax has remained at about 10% since 2008, when Yale researchers first started following public opinion about the subject. The overwhelming view of Americans, 76% say climate change is occurring. A full 70% of them are worried about it, with most of these being, happy Mother's Day, moms and children. Unfortunately, 50% of Americans feel hopeless about climate change, and they don't know what, if anything, can actually be done. But as Christians, hope is our specialty. We are a people of hope. It's our church motto, in fact. We are called to take hope to the world. The IPCC statement says, every action matters, every bit of warming matters, every year matters, every choice matters. And each of us can do our part. And we know too that Christ will give us strength to do it. However, the world has postponed action for more than 60 years now. And we're finally in the stage that we have to do a lot of big things and do them now. Sadly, most of the opposition to acting on climate change is coming from people who describe themselves as evangelical Christians. In fact, many Christians deny the very scriptures that call us to be God's stewards of God's planet. We need to speak to our brothers and sisters in Christ and remind them that we can follow God's scriptural commandments and that Christ will help us. As we act out of our faith and remember that our hope is in Christ, we love others more and more. Jesus said that Christians will be known by their love. In addition to loving each other, we must love God's world.
You know what?
Why do you think that evangelical Christians are more likely, like why do you think they feel so strongly about it?
We're going to talk about that in just about one or two slides if I can delay that question, because it really is important. Because here's an important fact, is all that group of that 10% who believe in climate change hope, 45% of them evangelical. And a lot of them like old white men. And it's like, don't confuse me with that. Don't talk to me about, you know, I'm retired, I've done it, I've worked my time, I've done my duty. I don't want to talk about this. It's a hoax. And we saw that, especially. People don't know how hard it is to be a doctor. But we saw this happen here.
Did you, have any ideas yourself?
Mainly I wonder, I mean, I think for a lot of evangelicals, there has to be just giving people the benefit of the doubt. I'm sure there's something rooted in the Bible that people kind of cling to say, like, well, this is why I don't believe the science, but I just wonder what that is, like where they succeed, where they have, if y'all have one side.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's move toward
Yeah.
the slides.
Let me talk first of all about sin. Let me talk about sin. We're good. We used to talk about sin a lot more. As a nation, the questions are: are we self-centered, greedy, materialistic? And the answer is absolutely. Americans make up 5% of the world population, consume 24%. We eat 850 billion calories of food a day. That's 200 billion more than we need enough to feed 8 million people. Here's the tragedy. That's tragic enough that we're all fat. We got high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, all that sort of thing. But here's the point of the real tragedy, is that we throw out 200 tons of animal food.
200,000.
200,000 tons of animal food every day. Can't we do that? And I'm guilty. I will go in and find celery, which I don't like. I'll turn it around, and it will be in there. And I said, well, I can feed this here. But yeah, we do that. It's amazing how many bananas we let go back. How many things like that occur.
If we let God's people as God's animals, we can do better.
We can do that. But why aren't we doing something? Jesus taught us how to deal with our own sin. He said, if we confess our sins, He's faithful and just to forgive our sin, cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Speaking of these words, we know that if we truly repent, that we're forgiven, and we can change and should change our behavior. This comes down to what you're asking.
Your one's on it.
Oh, I'm sorry. This comes down
We just skip something.
to a couple of the reasons that you've asked why. And you would think it would be biblical based, their objections, but they're not. They're only reading, if they read the Bible, if they're really using a compendium of what they think the Bible says, not what it actually says.
Or what a preacher's told them.
Or what a preacher's told them. That God will. You gotta watch.
What a bad preacher.
You gotta watch.
Bad
You gotta watch. But a lot of them say that it is arrogant of us to think that we can change the climate because it's all in God's control. We're not trying to change the climate. We're trying to undo what we've done and try to prevent disaster. The other thing they say is Jesus is coming back soon, and if the world gets destroyed, then Jesus will come back. And I call that the Judas syndrome, when they were trying to force Jesus to be the Messiah that he was not. Trying to force him to be the Messiah that would come and be the Messiah. And then these are just purely poor and bad readings of the Scripture. Supposing taking action on climate change cannot be justified by the Scripture. God created the earth and put us in charge as stewards. Excuses about what we expect God to do for us does not alleviate us from the responsibility that God has assigned.
We expect God not to let us destroy the earth. And we expect Jesus to return and fix it for us. Okay, so only 35% of people discuss climate change with others, even once in a while. So if we don't talk about it, why would anyone around us know that we care about it? Or even care about, why would they care about climate change themselves? And if they don't care, why would they act? Well, communication researchers show that most people need to hear a message about 7 times before they take action.
Real discouraging for a preacher.
That's why I preach the same thing.
You know,
That's why we don't do it.
you can recycle the same sermon, but no difference.
But it's almost impossible to become a broken record about climate change.
Y'all on record.
We decided to use it.
Yeah, we weren't sure about using that, but I wasn't sure. I'm not sure if you bring it in here. I'm not sure if you guys have to do
Okay, well, Christians know that when it's difficult to address a topic, it helps to prepare a personal testimony. So, arguments never help. People back into their corners become defensive or hardened in their positions. And so, with a charged topic, unfortunately it's a charged topic, but with that kind of topic, we need to start with something that unites us rather than divides us. So if we can connect with others first about something we both love and connect that passion that we both have to changing climate, then we can perhaps find or create an ally where we don't think we find one. So Dr. Hayhoe, who saw her picture a couple of slides ago, she tells a story about being at a meeting in London when a man approached her and said he previously watched her TED Talk on climate change. He said the TED Talk had inspired him to discuss climate change with strangers in his town. And he started by simply asking them, on a scale from 1 to 10, how important they thought the issue of climate change was. He said most people were eager to talk about this with him. So any of us could start a conversation with just that question. She also told about another man who had seen her TED Talk, who started keeping a record of all the people in his town that he had conversations with about climate change. He asked Dr. Hayhoe if she would like to see the list. And she said yes, hoping to see maybe as many as 60. In fact, his list was over 10,000 names. She's kept in touch with him, and by last year, he was up to 12,000 names. You know, his group the group of his names have organized online, and they have lobbied their city about climate change, of course. And the city has now divested from fossil fuels, they've invested in renewables, and they've created a sustainable plan, a sustainability plan for the city. So that all sounds good, right? But talking with strangers isn't really as easy as it sounds. I know it's very difficult for me to do that. So here are Dr. Hayhoe's suggestions. You start first by listening, always a good place to start, and observing. You have to know something about your conversation partner, what they enjoy, and especially what their values are. But you use that to bond with them. If it's another Christian, you might have an easy place to start, or you really might not, depending on their perspective on this. But there are 1,000 casual conversations that we can talk about climate change as a jumping off front. And we can do it in a natural way. People like to talk about themselves, where they live, their jobs, their families, vacations, kids' schools, their alma maters. Everybody talks about the current weather conditions or high food prices, high gas prices. These can all be used to discuss concerns about climate change. In fact, I could start a conversation today with somebody by saying, after church, we're planning to go look at the new Ford F-150, the all-electric new pickup, which is supposed to be a Pearl. Or I could add to that, but now we've changed our mind because the heat index is going to be around 105 degrees today. Our friends told us about this. I've had this conversation about the Ford F-150, and people will start talking about climate change when you start talking about an electric vehicle, or when you start talking about the heat index being over 105 today. So you just listen carefully, you identify your value. It's something that unites you, and now you have made a positive connection. Next, you can connect that step. This is the second step. Connect that value to climate change. Okay, you love the outdoor activities and you need clean air to enjoy them. If the heat is excessive, it prevents your enjoyment of what you want to do today. Hopefully your next meeting. All these things mean you have to move indoors and miss those kinds of enjoyment. If you both like scuba diving, you can talk about how some coral reefs you once saw are bleaching, losing their beauty. Gardening might be a really easy conversation to connect climate change with. Due to droughts, my plants are dying, or freezes. This is the second year in a row I've had to replace them. So, but, next slide, if we present people with problems and we don't offer solutions, they start feeling disenfranchised and powerless, and they cope with that by just trying to forget the conversation and the problem altogether, or just ignore it. So the third step is to inspire them to act by discussing steps they might be interested in taking. The antidote to hopelessness is taking action. There are thousands of actions that we can choose, and every one of them is helpful. We're going to talk more about those next week, especially focus on that next week. This list on the slide is quite a brief method, but each of us can make a plan about the changes we're going to make, not based on what someone else tells us to do, but based on the choices that fit for us and our lifestyles.
Quick comment. That exactly how that right? We would see the lightning, we're on the wait list.
And these are our friends who told us about it.
And so we would see it on Thursday night, we came back to parents babysitting, and I wouldn't call them climate deniers or anything, but they're like, so why do you want this? And I kind of made a joke, like, well, we're just trying to save the world one car at a time.
Yeah.
They're like, well, where do you think the power comes from? Like, well, we're really hopeful for more renewable energy. Like, they immediately, right? I mean, that's not a great example, but it's like, I could have just been like, yeah, but I don't even know what that means. Like, I'm not lobbying for that, but like, that was sort of their. Anyway, just conversation that was sort of met with resistance, and then like, it's not, it's not sure that's what they prefer. Why does it matter if all your power is still coming from electricity?
Oh, well, that's an interesting factor because that's we can choose now. Or now is electric, and I'm sure you can choose it with CPS. You can choose to get your energy from renewable energy. It's possible at home, but Texas is the #2 producer of solar energy. It's hard to believe.
Yeah,
but
we export it to other states.
We could. We could. And what's interesting is that on each side of the road, if we have a mile, on each side of the road, the solar panels, Lubbock and Around, we could provide enough power for the whole United States. Period. That's on the sun. It's doable.
And there are no emissions. That's right.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons to have it, and there's not. Our kids have EVs, and they just don't have the maintenance cost of that. They can change their tires and things like that, but they don't have to change spark plugs. They're not tuning carburetors. They're not doing things that, they don't have cooling systems.
we'll talk more next week too about all the reasons this makes sense. Not just electric vehicles, but other changes that we can make, why they make sense financially as well as other reasons.
And just shoring up the infrastructure, in other words, being better insulated, closing the gaps in our housing. To say, you can it's just surprising how much you can save and how much you, not only in money, but just making some adjustments to homes, for instance, making it more energy. Our energy efficiency is so bad. It's like 45%. So anyway, but the other thing is that we can have a bigger conversation. We can have a bigger conversation by, whatever organization we apply to, our church, our work site, our homeowner association, book club, kids sports organization, even city council meetings where we can do things like recycling. All of these do make a difference. And there are solutions that these can take place. I mean, you're talking about green spaces are critical, and because especially in poor neighborhoods, there are no trees, there are no green spaces. That increases heat. You don't have to be an expert in any of these to suggest something. And you just need to give them some hope. And we're going to give you a lot of places and ideas that you can plug into, especially beginning later in our church in Oikonomos. So another place that we can have a bigger impact is in the conversations with politicians. And boy, we have a challenge here. Texas, there's no question about that. But Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger was one of the first ones to sign a bill to cap greenhouse gas emissions in California in 2006. Boy, did he catch that point. Today, politicians don't seem to listen to a very small group of folks. But we have to keep banging on the doors, sending letters and emails, and making phone calls. The congressperson is probably not going to hear you. I don't think mine hears me. But it's going to be processed by a clerk, an intern, or a clerk that probably isn't even being paid. And they're going to tabulate these things. And we have to keep pounding away and keep sending those letters and emails and making those phone calls. Some of the people are never going to change their mind, but maybe it's possible that either they won't change their mind, maybe they'll shut up. Maybe they'll be quiet. Maybe they won't take a stand against doing something good for the environment or making fun of it. The more conversations we have, this is the power of talk, the more the polls will reflect our environmental concern. And the thing about politicians is, if they think it's going to affect their job, that's when we get their attention. In 2015, Little County, Connecticut, the geography noted that Little County, Connecticut started having all these clusters of solar panels get on the house. This is another way to do it. Not just buying an EV, but putting solar panels on the house. What they found out was they wanted to know, the geographers wanted to know why these solar panels were showing up in this neighborhood. What they found was there was an early adopter. Early adopter was one of those people who like the latest technology, all that, and they go out and find all the right information and they have it all installed. Well, once that early adopter had their panels installed, neighbors started looking, dropping by, asking questions, because these clusters began to spring up with all these homes and solar panels, because people could talk to a real live, happy customer. And of all places in 2020, Florida did a story on a community called Babcock Ranch, where the entire community was solar powered in southwest Florida. It was a group of people with the same values that wanted to make a difference. They wanted for their family, and they wanted a better lifestyle, a sustainable lifestyle for the family. And their testimonies were contagious. Our testimonies are contagious when we speak them and when we act them. The early church spread the gospel of Christ by giving the testimony about how Christ changed their life. It's still the most effective way of spreading the gospel. The good news about the problem of climate change is that we can do something about it, we can make a difference, and we can help other people and change their lives too. We just need to tell others how. Next week, we're going to cover the specific actions that we can take. We're going to give the details about how much difference we can make and how fast we can make a difference if we act. Questions and comments. Did we answer your question about even one of the questions too that one of the things that we've often quoted, they'll say plantation and talk about seasons, that there's always a season. They said that's proof that there will always be seasons. That's a pretty shallow reading of the scripture. Yeah, they're going to be seasons, and it won't continue to have seasons long as earth. Yeah. That doesn't mean it's not going to be hot.
I think what we're talking about here is to motivate.
Right.
You have to motivate people, and I think it's a lot more complicated than a lot of people. You have to actually understand what those motivations are. It might be 10% or whatever. You're never going to change it. That might be true, but that's still 90%. Right. And out of that 90%, there may be a large percentage that, well, they have to be selected and motivated by some true leadership. So you cannot be someone who's saying, hey, you need to do these things, but then in their own lifestyle, they're not living that. And I think back to the COVID policies and a lot of people do that, yet they've seen often political leaders not living what they're requiring everyone else to do. So we can actually have true leadership, someone who's especially at the federal level. So I think a lot of it is going to be like that town in Connecticut or maybe a town in Texas that is out of office. It's going to take those communities to kind of allow them to see, okay, they're having success. Most people may deny climate change or whatever it is. They still love the earth. Just have to find the right motivation. Even if you're right with facts, you want to preach it. Lots of preaching. Kind of like some slides are saying, tie back to the audience, tie back to the children. It's kind of requires village. A lot of times that's going to come from politicians saying, well, this is what we're doing. Checking off. I know politicians have to take private planes. I know that's just an issue. 12,000 financial, it's using more power than my house in months.
Well, you said a lot of
Yeah, it was
that are
really
good.
extreme conscious.
Yeah.
My journey has been over 20 years. And, I started with cycles, thinking that this is just a cycle, but it's totally unfair. My challenge, I'm a person that needs cycles. I mean, real science stuff. I don't go to the internet for information. Okay. I want to read what the journals say, scientists say, I want to know, and I'm motivated by that. But that's rare, because I don't know anybody that's motivated as much motivated by facts and money. Because, to me it's just logical, it makes sense to do it. And it's like, it's just stupid to take horse dewormer or COVID, right? I mean, that to me is just dumb. And it's like, I'm motivated by science and by facts. But whereas a lot of people aren't, because like you just said, they dig in deeper. Don't confuse me with facts. or the scientists have all these contrarian motivation, underlying motive, why they want the world to change, to be healthier.
I don't know why like you, I think just would say like if I'm presented with facts and they didn't agree with it, it's actually very easy for me to I actually go around my house this morning and tell my kids, I don't know, it's Oikonomos, is that I butchered it in my house. But you know, I'll tell my kids, you know, I pay off the lights and do that, but I will tell you that I want to be more for energy, I want to be in a little better place. But I'll tell you, like, personally, what drives me nuts is when politicians who I don't believe live that life that they're trying to
Yeah.
advocate. That drives me nuts. And I'll say, like, that's a personal bias I would have. I recognize that, but they just drive me crazy. It almost makes me want to not do something. I would say that's
And one of the things I like to comment is really you didn't make a lot of points, but one of the things I wanted to say is, you know, Ray and I are teaching this class, it doesn't mean we're good. Right? But no, I know. But we have to remember all of us are sinners. And none of us is going to do it perfectly. But your comment about motivation, I think, is spot on, which is, you know, most of us are just inert. You know, something has to get us off off our seat and go do something. And so, wherever we can find a commitment from them, we can grab onto it. Wherever we can find a commitment for ourselves, we need to grab onto it. Because this is truly a commitment that hopefully at the end of this class we will all be saying, I want to make a commitment to God. This is stewardship, remember, it's not necessarily about what your money does, but I want to make my commitment to God to do these things, to be a part of what God tells me to do. But not everybody's doing it.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's a grassroots, because a national message can be good. And I think there probably should be more messaging, the motivation, like that has to be more. It can't just be like, hey, we got to implement these policies, we don't agree with it, but you're bad person. That's just, that might be true, maybe it is. But
And I might feel that way.
I'm not saying that that's how it's going. I'm telling you.
No,
like the messaging that says people are personally just won't reach people with emergency motivations.
Right.
Big message. It hasn't happened like things like this.
You also have to be like financially motivated, I think. That's huge. Over the last 20 years, technology has been catching up where it's actually, you know, either equivalent or even cheaper at times to go the collector route on things. And, like, I don't think CPS, I don't think you can even choose your not that I know of. But Burnell is probably ahead of the game as far as technology on being able to do that. So a lot of what we're waiting for is kind of the choices option where you can make choices that aren't going to be twice as expensive to go route. And I think the FFP could have done that, right? They could have made their trucks like $100,000 and people would pay for them, but because they're making them almost equivalent to the gas, we get more people to jump on that option because it's financially viable as an option.
Yeah, it is there. One of the interesting things about our church is I've been getting bids on our church for solar power, and one of the things that I discovered about there's a plant here called Mission's Solar Panel, and they make one of the best solar panels in the world. I mean, they are top of the line. And what happened was that when the oil companies laid off all their employees, when they were in the downturn several years ago, Mission offered those employees jobs at the same level, paid them at the same level, retrained them to make solar panels. So it's kind of like saying there are really a lot of things, like there's Bob English, who used to be a Republican, North Carolina. Bob English started with Republicans, he has, and it is how you use the free market, how you can generate profitable industry, and how renewable energy is profitable. And doesn't into it. Our son does that for a living, goes into these corporations and helps them turn profits into renewable energy. Not only save money, but make money.
And I wanted to say one more thing in relation to Will's comment, not that this will be the outcome of our class, but I don't normally suggest that people write to the White House. I mean, normally it's better to write to people closer to you. But if this whole group decided we wanted to write, each of us wanted to write to the White House and suggest that they put the person in charge of, climate change, this number of letters, at least it would get attention. It wouldn't just be
Well,
a
they do have
half
some.
Huh? They do, okay, well, was that kind of what you were saying?
I understand, yes, that we take private claims,
Yeah,
it's interesting, I mean, it's.
The more.
Oh, I think, yeah, I would say maybe alter, because politics in this day and age are so like, it's
crazy.
such a minefield, and you can't really almost involve all, but if you did the same thing to your favorite company, if everybody wrote Amazon and said, hey, I would like to maintain my Amazon customer, membership, but I would like you, if everybody did that, I
To
think
use
that's
fewer boxes.
right, like that's a non-political, like purely bottom line financial based thing that Amazon, if they got enough people, and I think Amazon actually does a pretty good
Yeah,
job.
by 2030, they will be all.
Yeah, but like, CPS, like if CPS had enough people saying, I would like an option, and I'd be willing to pay, 5% more if I had that, they would probably implement something like that. So just to take the politics out of it, I'm thinking like ways that you could still have options, because like you said, people are lazy. But if I had the option, I'm not, I know a lot of people who don't recycle because they have to pay $15 a month, which blows my mind. Like we would definitely pay $15 a month to have the option. Yeah, I'll up north, like I think we and maybe $5 worth, but people don't do that because that small amount.
Well, in Virginia, they charge.
Yeah, if you
You
don't
know,
see like that, actually, I don't.
Yeah, they put it in this, it's in the thing, and they offer you everything to do it. So there are a lot of things that can be done.
But I just want to say, if you want to affect politicians, having worked fairly high levels of agency, I know if I got 35 letters about the kind of saying, we don't like what you're doing, we would have paid attention to that. Okay.
It might not sound like in the letter, but it is too. It is.
So both, I guess my point there is exactly both politics and especially maybe industry, wherever you're a consumer, it makes a difference.
Unilever is a huge company. We'll talk about it next week. They are one of the big leaders.
I'm sorry, thank you all for
Thank you all.
staying engaged.